Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about us at officehours.global. First hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. Second hour is something we want to spend a little bit more time on. We will be talking today about audio issues. So, what audio issues have bedeviled us over the time, as well as how do we solve those and how do we approach them? So, we'll talk about that today. Tomorrow, John Barker is going to be here from here to record, talk about some new releases. So, we're pretty excited to have him here. Thursday, we have Office Hours 2.0 update. We'll just talk about where we are and where we're going with that. And then on Friday, we'll talk about the future of co-working spaces. That was something that came up in the second hour suggestion. So we're going to throw that in there and discuss that a little bit. And then, of course, Saturday is the long day, and it's a really long day. We've got a lot to do. Of course, education is coming in at education's coming in at 8 o'clock. I'm a little distracted. Bill, you've got an auto gain issue over there. And then at 11 o'clock, we have Super Saturday. And I think that we have a video about Super Saturday. Dennis?
Office Hours turns the shortest Saturday of the year into
Super Saturday.
A full day of live broadcasts featuring Office Hour members from around the world.
We'll start at 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time with an hour of live Q&A from Office Hours experts, followed by the weekly Education Hour.
Available only on Zoom.
Then at 11 a.m., we'll make Mexican rice together on The Cooking Show with host Shannon Cooper from her kitchen in San Francisco.
She's joined by Alex Lindsay, also in California, Dennis Champion Walker in the UK, and Damayanti Gajar in South Africa.
At noon, enjoy a live concert with Todd Reynolds from his studio in North Adams, Massachusetts.
Then off to Belfast for an hour of live entertainment at the Accidental Theatre featuring the Belfast Method, using a global production crew.
We wrap up the day with the first ever special edition of Conversations with Tony Mobley.
Joining Tony are Todd Reynolds, Hasmukh Gajar, and Richard Lavery.
And that's your Super Saturday lineup.
Office Hours, from everywhere to everywhere.
That's a lot of fun. Good job. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the questions.
Okay, our first one this morning comes from Eduardo Augustine in Panama, and he says, I recently noticed that there is Zoom OSC, Zoom ISO, and the usual Zoom. Should I continue using normal Zoom or switch to Zoom OSC ISO, and why?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Eduardo, you don't need to switch to anything unless you have a specific need. For example, if you want to scrape one of the panelists as a separate video source, you would go to Zoom ISO for that. I use that with a external box and a deck link, so I literally can pull 4, and this panel also does the same thing.
I'm sorry. Something happened in the back end. I said not to talk about that, but let's go to the next question.
Okay, moving on to the next question. Again, it comes from Eduardo Augustine in Panama, and Eduardo this time says, I recently noticed there is, we just read that one, so let me move to done and move to the next one. I finally killed my box cutter, says Jason Bache in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Thank you, Office Hours. Does anyone have a link to a replacement?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So a regular box cutter, I'm not sure where. Well, there's many different places, but this is what I use for any type of box cutting nowadays. This is the Works zip cut. It'll cut through a lot of different cardboards and those annoying plastic cases and things like that, and just basically just zips right through. A battery charge is really great. I use this every other week when it's time to cut down all my cardboard, because I do a ton of stuff. It'll also do a lot of fabrics, leathers, and everything like that. So I'll get the link in Mukana.
Go ahead, Chris.
That's crazy. First of all, I was surprised you were actually asking about a box cutter, but I tell you what I use. There's a lot of companies will make a knife that when you open it, it looks like a normal pocket knife, but when you open it up, it's actually a razor blade in there, and like a straight. I don't know what kind of. It's the kind you buy at the hardware store, and so it's really when it gets dull, you can throw it out. Yeah, maybe I can't see that. But I have one of those and I love it. I use it to cut down boxes. I don't use a battery-powered tool to cut down boxes, but I'm
But it's
fascinated
awesome.
by that.
No, I kind of want to do that now. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I use one he was just describing. This is from Great Neck. It clamps in. It has replaceable razor blades in it, and you can get them on Amazon. There's a variety of them from Sheffield, etc. If you just search for Sheffield or Great Neck box cutters, you will find them on Amazon.
Go ahead, Rupert.
This is the OG Stanley knife, kind of variation on some of the things that have been talked about, but this is my go-to.
And Bill?
You guys are too fancy for me. I went to Harbor Freight and bought a giant box of 100 single-edge razor blades. I use them for all of my household cutting needs, and they never fail.
Next question.
Next question is from Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia, and he says, has anyone done the MacOS update? And if so, have you had any issues?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, Tony, if you mean the Monterey 12.01 on my Silicon M1 Mac Mini, no problems. That seems to be okay. The only small problem I have is that little orange dot that appears in the upper right corner when the Zoom calls are activated. It's supposed to show that you have an active mic, and it's just on all the time.
Go ahead, Jason.
I will add that is very much by design and in my opinion, very welcome, because what it means is there's something actively trying to engage your microphone, which, writ large is a great thing. I, too, have done the update. I have several Mac Minis that I've left behind, and the new Mac OS is just fine.
Go ahead, Chris.
I have it on a 2017 iMac Pro 12.01, and it's working fine.
I find that I have a lot of display issues. I'm seeing these red flashes when I open up images and so on and so forth. So I feel like I probably jumped too early. It's unusual for me to jump more than 6 months out. I usually wait for a long time for it to settle, and I feel like I won't do it again. So I'll stick with the older one in the future. Go ahead, Chris.
Are they really big images, or what
the
kind
red
of images?
the image comes up red and then switches to and then slowly draws
In what app?
in everything. Like it's at an OS level. When I open up an image, it didn't happen before, and so it's definitely. And then there are just lots of little things of apps not totally working inside of Monterey yet, and so it's just usually I let that settle and just have it. Go ahead, John.
I'm seeing an update 12.1 and not 01, so I'm not sure what's new in .1.
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
That's what I was going to say. I'll post a link to the various installers in Mukana for 12.1, including one you can download yourself, so you don't have to use Apple system.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from John Foltz in Sellings Grove, Pennsylvania. He says, is anyone using Resilio Sync? And if so, what are the pros and cons?
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, Resilio Sync is better known by its more common name, BitTorrent Sync. And then they realized, just like Comcast, that they'd better change their name because, people don't usually want to sync over BitTorrent. It is, I don't have anything directly to say against it, other than the version that is current and stable is 16 months old. I will draw your attention to Security Now, episode 734. Sync.com is where Steve Gibson went with that.
Next question.
Alan Kuchendorfer is up next, and he says, for Zoom vocal audio from average home workers, do you generally leave the background noise suppression in auto, low, medium, or high? Thanks.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Alan, it depends on how noisy your room is. If you have a lot of background noise, you might want to put it on auto. But if it's just a typical noise from a fan or two in the room, low should work well for you. And it also depends on what outboard gear you might be using. In my case, I use an AFX channel, which has a built-in expander gate, and it works really well. Probably don't need all the Zoom stuff, but I try to use it like a spice. It's just enough to get the job done.
Sorry, I got in the wrong window. Go ahead, Courtney.
I leave it in auto because it will do a pretty good job of removing background noise, like, if somebody's got a lawnmower outside or intermittent noises. However, you have to remember that if you have original sound turned on, it disables the background noise removal. So you have to turn off original sound for it to take effect, and then it will jump to whatever auto, low, or medium that you have set.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, Auto does generally a pretty good job. The best way to reduce noise if you have background noise and if you don't have outboard noise suppression is just get the microphone closer and closer to your mouth as you can.
In general, I would just leave it on auto. If you're talking to someone about what they should do, just leave it on auto. If you're doing it yourself, you can play with it yourself, but I wouldn't have civilians change that setting. Next question.
Alex Golner in London, in the UK, here in the panel, says, when we stream in HDR, what's the color gamut? Is it PQ? It looks like Web CSS will move to a smaller gamut of P3 in 2022 to 2023. Can HDR live events and video encourage the web to move faster?
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, this is in response to a Twitter thread that I saw, which linked to an article about this new color standard they're going to use in CSS, which is called LCH, which stands for lightness, chroma, hue. And one of the advantages of that is the fact that 3 different colors with the same lightness value actually are perceptually look the same. So it's really useful for design point of view, because obviously the current other things like lab, 2 different colors can have the same L value, but they could be very different brightnesses. So it's a bit about human perception. So that's useful for designers in CSS. But I was quite shocked to see that they're going for a relatively small color gamut. And I was wondering what we're doing with video and streaming events.
Yeah, so what we're using for the test event, and I just posted the link in there. I was a little late to get it off the ground, but what we're using is PQ. So HDR10 is what we're outputting at 1,000 nits. So that's the approach that we're taking at the moment. HLG is usually a little less than that. So, but it's easier to process. So you'll see a lot of broadcasters use HLG because it's simpler. And then yeah, so those are the things that we use there. Of course, a lot of my work, we do work in Vision, and so in Vision we actually are much higher. We can go to 2,000 nits, 4,000 nits. Next question.
Comes from one Alex Lindsay in Nevada, California. And he says, have we concluded that the Zoom system no longer bumps meetings when a portal is used to join?
Go, Jeffrey.
It still does bump it, but I've been finding that a lot of people have been getting bumped already, especially when they start going live on YouTube, Facebook, or anything else, that their meeting will go from 360 to 720. But yes, the portal will still, if there are some unset up accounts or older accounts, it will bump it up.
Because I've seen reports that we're not seeing that, like that people are not seeing the bump happening. And so I was just curious if it, it's not happening consistently anymore, I guess. And so I think that it may be either a certain devices or something, but it appears that it's not a consistent bump up anymore. Next question. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, so I did some testing with Guy on this, and it didn't seem to make a difference.
So Guy, it didn't seem to bump to 720 by adding something to a...
Yeah, it looked that way.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're seeing more and more people are asking me, I guess, that why isn't this going up to 720 anymore? And so I just thought I'd bring it up here and see if anyone knew anything, but it doesn't appear that is working as well or at all. Next question.
We have a rare double Alex Lindsay question. This one comes up and says, my daughter needs a new standalone keyboard. 61 keys should be enough. What are the suggestions for keyboards under $500 US?
Go ahead, Michael. Can't hear you, Michael.
Sorry about that. I was bringing up the window. It's an MX61 made by Yamaha, and it's version 2, and it comes in a great blue color. Nice. The neat thing about it is it's got 1,000 motif sounds and velocity sensitive keys, and it's a 661 synth controller, and it comes with a little bit of software. It's a little bit more than what you were looking for. It's $769 from Sweetwater, and it's on sale. If you want to get under 500, there's tons of Casio keyboards that could get you under the 500. But I really like this MX61 because it has 128 note polyphony. So if you're plugging it into a computer later on, you can do, 8 notes of keyboard, 8 notes of strings, all the way up to 128 different sounds.
That's great. Go, Jeffrey.
Yeah, Yamaha. I'd do Yamaha over Casio almost any day. I think the quality of Yamaha is a lot better, and there are some Yamaha options 61 key keyboards that are under $500. They just won't have all the bells and whistles like that one does.
Next question.
Marty Paseta Jr. in Los Angeles is up next. He says, for live scripted and unscripted, I use scriptation.com to mark up scripts. What's your favorite tool for this?
I have to admit that we use Google Docs a lot. So I'd love to say that we should look at other things like that. But for what we do, it tends to be that. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, the cynic in me just can't help but go back to preview, like preview and my Apple Pencil.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us are doing notes, within those things. We don't have to run them as scripts, so we don't have to build them in something that would look like a script for us. What we're worried about is not having any extra characters, because a lot of times what for us, what happens is that those scripts go into a Google Doc, and then people are annotating them all the way down and making changes. And the main thing we want is no special characters, because we're going to cut and paste that into a teleprompt system. And so that becomes the thing that we worry about the most. Go ahead, Bill.
I've, for all the years I've been doing corporate stuff, there was those two camps, television or movie type scripts, and then 2-column AV scripts. And there are programs that do both of those, but most of the time I just use a standard word processing program and set the margin of everything below a header area as narrower so that it looks like a script. Usually set it to a space and a half. And in working in a general text format like that, I find it's nice because you can send it to almost anybody and they can read it. I'm not a great believer in those scripting programs, but I know people who are working on scripts kind of go down that path, and I just would watch it because sometimes they have way more capabilities than you actually need to do your day-to-day work. But
good, Courtney.
I don't have a specific suggestion for you, but most of the time, if you're working in production and you get a script from production, they're in PDF format and they're watermarked because they're very conscious of piracy and that the script escaping. So you need to find a PDF reader that will allow you to do markups on top of it, which is just graphical notation so that you can write in something or check something or underline something in the PDF itself. And a lot of people use those on the set. I see in iPads and tablets for tracking the script as they're going through production, and then they can put their own notes in the margins, and it stays as an overlay into that PDF. And look for a good PDF reader that allows markup. That's all I'm saying.
And I think that's probably a cultural thing from LA and almost everywhere else, which is that there's, LA and New York, we do see people like handwrite things over top of it. In San Francisco and most tech companies that we work with, that would not be acceptable. Like you'd get a whole bunch of, if I ever wrote anything on I'd get a whole bunch of clients asking why I did that. Because they can't process it. Everything's all tags. You just, in the tech world, everything's all tagged. So you just highlight things and then you build a note that's connected to that highlight. You see little flags all the way down. But so I think it's definitely a cultural difference there between processes. Go ahead, Jason.
I'm just wondering, along the lines of text sanitization, are you familiar with TextCraft, Alex?
No.
Oh, man. Okay. Consider the link in Discord.
Okay, excellent. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and my reference was for personal markup for your own use, not for publication, not for other people, not for sharing your marks with anybody else. It's just for your
totally
own copy of that. That's what I was talking about.
We don't even do that. Like, I mean, the hand. I haven't handwritten anything for a long time, and so it's just the reason I brought that up was that it is a cultural thing that we see, because we see scripts come back with people writing over top of stuff, but they're usually producers from LA, and a couple from New York, but we never see that anywhere else, like in the world. And it's just because they've done more of it than we have, and they have a very specific pipeline that they've worked with for a long time, and that's what they're comfortable with. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. In fact, it's probably faster, but it's just an interesting thing that we've noticed over a decade, which is that when we get handwritten things, there's a whole bunch of like, where did this come from? And they're like, oh yeah, those guys. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I agree with Alex 100% on scripts that are in production. When you get to performance, though, performance scripts, it's almost impossible to work with them if you can't annotate them. I know as a voice talent, I'm constantly marking up pauses and accents and things like that. So if somebody sends me a script that is not in a format that I can mark up for myself for my read, I will translate it into some other format instantly because I just can't work that way.
Which is funny because for me, I write everything in. I mean, I because I run my own teleprompter, so I just am annotating them while I'm changing it and annotating in the text while I'm reading it. Like as I rehearse, I just keep on tweaking everything. But the only version of it is what's in the screen. Next question.
Moving on, Jeff Powers here in the panel says, for chroma keying a scene, would putting a LUT on the overall shot be the best solution for correcting?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I would hold off on using a LUT until later. As you probably know, when you light a chroma key, whether it's green or blue, best to light the screen first to get an even lighting effect, and sometimes 50% seems to be a good number, 50% of the light value, and then light the talent, and then apply your program to getting that green screen. If you're doing it in post, chances are you're using like Primat or Keylight. A lot of those already have their own built-in correction, and they're very specific to getting a even lighting effect on it. So a LUT isn't necessarily going to fit a chroma key or fix it. It might fix the overall after the fact, after the key's been done, but I would save it for last.
Jeffrey, are you talking about after you've done the composite to put a LUT over it instead of before?
What I'm talking about is for live streaming. So yesterday we were helping somebody with their chroma key, and I noticed the chroma key in the back because they were doing multiple layer chroma key with video and then their scene and then them, and they were very bright on the front. So and they were using Filmic Pro and iPhone for that. So there's not that much. There's a little bit of control, but not that much. So I was thinking it would be better to have that all set up and then put an overlay with a LUT style item to kind of blend it all together.
Yeah, so some of their footage was 709 and some of it was in log. Like is that the issue? When it sounds like it. I mean, if they had layers of other videos, probably 709, and then they had this log file which was coming out of their phone. In that case, I would probably think pretty hard about putting what you're going to key into 709 before you key it, because otherwise it's going to be really hard to match everything up. So in general, if you were going to do keying in post, I would definitely not put a LUT on while I was doing it. But if you're keying live, you pretty much have to get that. You have to get that key you have to get the keyed footage into the same color space. And if you don't get it into the same color space, you're going to have a lot of trouble trying to get all those things to line up. So it's definitely what you probably saw was not very brights and not very and a lot of raised blacks. And that's what's going to happen with a log image. And you're going to need to So I would probably do it that way. The other thing is if you're going to do that, you then have to tune your green screen to the LUT. So you're going to have to look at it through. What I would want to do is look at it through scopes and then be able to make sure I've got a smooth screen, that I've got, that I'm not peaking anywhere. Those are all things that become important. So just like you would do with any other key. Go ahead, Bill.
I put LUTs into two categories. There are correction LUTs and then there are looks LUTs, and those are just broad for me. But correction LUTs are anything that go way upstream. And in general, I try to do them as early as possible. This sounds to me like it's a correction LUT. You're having a problem. You've got mismatched footage. You want to get into the same space for what Alex is talking about. So I would consider that a reasonable use of a LUT to fix something. But I would always take it off before I sent that project on to somebody else.
Well, this is a live key, though. This is a live key in a show. So this is what's going on is it's going out.
Fix it for what you need to do with it, basically.
Yeah. Next question.
Yeah. Moving on to Eduardo Augustine in Panama. He's back with, I'll soon have to stream a funeral, a memorial service through Zoom, and would like to know how to lock out mics for viewers similar to how we do in office hours. I don't want to mute them, but disable the mic entirely. Can this be done in Zoom? And if so, how?
Go ahead, Rupert.
The distinction here is that office hours is a webinar, so you have the concept of attendees who you can't contribute in video or audio. But if you're in a Zoom meeting, there is no way to stop participants connecting with audio, and even if you did, that would then prevent them from hearing anything. You can, when you create the meeting, you can set up that they will be muted. Participants will be muted upon entry, so you don't have to manually mute them. And then when you do start the meeting, you'll want to use the security tab in the meeting to prevent them from unmuting themselves. But I think that's going to be your best option.
And for a funeral, I would really recommend thinking about webinars, for that as opposed to meetings, and then that way you can have the people who want to speak or give their, bring them up as panelists. So raise your hand if you'd like to say something, and then bring people in. I think that you'd probably find that to be a lot more orderly. Next question.
Next one comes from Jason Bache here in the panel from Albuquerque, New Mexico. He says, does anyone have a suggestion for masking a green screen in Photoshop? Background is cleanly lit, but I'm having a problem with the professional shoot I did last week.
Go ahead, Jason.
I just wanted to elaborate on this. I'm just looking for a plugin. I know exactly how to do this in Photoshop, and the whole thing has become so automated that it's been making me crazy. I have one shot that is just driving me nuts. The guy had red hair and is fairly complected, and my green screen is just making me crazy.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
And so that's obviously a still image that you're trying to do. And I had an answer, but I don't think it applies anymore. But I was going to suggest using the same garbage mat on each of the shots. And once you have one that works, it just sort of eliminates a lot of the other activity going on in the shot.
Yeah, one of the things that we do for a lot of this when we're having, if there's any variance in the green screen at all, is create what we call procedural garbage mats and procedural core mats. So what you do is you pull a regular key and then you push its contrast really high, like almost to black and white. Then you use a min to pull it in to the inside, and then you make that white. And then you do a max to push it out, and you make that black. And what you'll end up with, so then what you end up with is you knock out everything around that person. And we do it with video. So if the video is moving, you get that procedural garbage mat and the procedural core mat moving with it. But that means that the only thing you're worried about is the edge. And now you're doing fine tuning on the edge, to grab it. Now with stills, it's a lot easier. You do what you can do what we call divide and conquer, which is that you'll cut out the head, cut out the shoulders, key the shoulders one way, key the head another way. The real problem you get into is where you transition between those, and getting those just right. But those are, so the first thing to do, that's how I key everything, is a procedural core mat, procedural garbage mat. And then, and you just make it big enough so that it accounts for motion blur. And then after that, you can just, now you're only just working on the edges there. And with the other thing to remember is that with Photoshop, you can go in and paint things in. You can't do this with video, but you can go in there and just look at move the alpha channel, and then use your burn in and lighten to just kind of, you just kind of softly push everything up. Rather than painting it itself, you're pushing things down. Like a burn in tool is really good for pushing the dark areas down, but not necessarily making it black. Same thing, you can do a couple of those different types of effects to kind of coax the detail out of the edges if you need to. Stills, again, are relatively straightforward compared to video. Next question.
Next question comes from David Smith, in Salt Lake City, Utah. And he says, I'm building a Starship themed studio set. Think the Captain's Ready Room from Star Trek. Would short throw projectors and screens work to show star fields out the windows? I'm looking at the Epson LS300W 3600 lumens projectors.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yes, you would want to rear project them so that the projector is not in the room. You got to be careful about the fan noise if this is a production where you're recording audio, because that higher brightness projector, and especially if it's a short throw, it means it's going to be close to the window. You might hear it. So you might want to go with something as bright an LED source projector as you can find, because they have a little lower fans because they don't generate quite as much heat. But yes, you can. And if you're using an LED, make sure LED light source in the projector, make sure it doesn't flicker. So check it with your camera at whatever frame rate you're going to be running, so that the shutter of the camera does not cause a beat frequency with the chopper, the dimmer on the LEDs, which can cause flicker on camera. So test it.
Good, Mitchell.
Yeah, will it work? Yeah, it will work. Star Trek: The Next Generation, I think about mid-season, in their second season, they switched from doing it in post to having a projection for the ready room and 10 forward. it works really well. There's another way to do it too. A friend of mine invented the Lightscape. His name is Itis Gimbitas, and it's a dark curtain with LEDs sewn into it that can be either animated or just hold a standard position. I think they're kind of expensive, but you can rent them. And if you hang those behind there, you don't have any noise and you don't have any issues with projection.
Go ahead, David.
Up in Ticonderoga, New York, there's a Star Trek, the original series studio tour.
Yeah.
They have some pretty impressive sets. And I think there was a fan series that was briefly shot in there. They did most of them practically with computer monitors behind all the computer stations. The place is cool. Worth the trip if you're up in the New York area.
That's awesome. I've seen it. I didn't know where. I couldn't remember where it was, but I've seen that they built it. It's amazing. I think they even got some of the Star Trek actors to show up for some of the stuff that they were doing. So.
Shatner was recently there, and it's built in like an old supermarket. In the center of city, Ticonderoga.
We should do a second hour. We should figure out how we do a second hour from there.
I'm going to be up there.
Talk to them. Socialize it.
Okay, we'll see what I can do.
The one thing you'll have trouble with the projector is black levels. So projectors have a really hard time getting to black levels. So be careful of that. If it was me, I would probably try to figure out ways to create architectural things that would hide the fact that I was using multiple 70-inch monitors or something like that. That had it. That had something there. You may not have that full wide there, but I think that from a cost perspective, I think you're going to have a hard time getting the really blacks when you. And I think you're going to want that for the stars, but that's up to you. But that would be probably the biggest challenge from my perspective. Next question.
Namal Goler in Argentina is up next, and he says, "Greetings. I designed a streaming setup for hybrid events in the university where I work. We have a Data Video HS1600T with 3 PTC 140 cameras. Can I use the RTSP or UDP stream from those cameras for setting up a multi-view in OBS for a director's cut preview?"
Go ahead, Guy.
I don't think that I would do RTSP because the latency would be way too great. But I looked up that camera, and you can use SRT, which would have a much lower latency. So I would use something like, if they're not local, I would use even something like Zoom or Video Ninja to take a multi-view. So feed those into something that can create a multi-view, like an SRT to NDI converter, and then kick it out. Like KiloView has a great free multi-view. So if it's to get a list of all the cameras to a remote person, I would probably go with Video Ninja and then SRT to NDI. That's probably one of your best ways. But there's also something called DV Cloud that is from Data Video, and if you go to the HS1600 page, you can see how they have a couple different workflows. And they have some new devices, one which we should probably talk about in a future episode, called the BRB, which will allow some of their units to transcode and VPN. So it's something that we didn't get to see at NAB, but Data Video has some cool stuff coming out.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and Douglas says, "Many smaller players in the space industry have borrowed tech from the broadcast industry, like DVB-S2 for satellite transmission. Haven't IP-based solutions like LTN and the Switch supplanted satellite as the broadcast world's preferred path?"
They definitely have replaced a lot of what we used to use satellite for. So we've used the Switch and LTN pretty heavily. The Switch is probably a little bit higher quality and lower latency, but LTN is more cost effective. And so we see almost every network has the Switch and LTN. Almost every major TV station will have at least LTN built into it. And so those are things that are very, very popular, but they don't replace satellite. In the sense that a lot of things can still go wrong between one place and another, and especially with LTN, they're still on a public internet, so they have more issues than the Switch does, and so the satellite, especially if you already own the satellite uplink and the satellite downlink, a satellite is actually relatively inexpensive to use per hour, and especially for some groups, they own their own transponders. I mean, they've rented out, they've leased permanently transponders, and so that becomes relatively inexpensive. And so you oftentimes want to have a primary backup. The disadvantage of satellite, of course, is latency. and rain. So unless you're using C-band, if you're using a KU dish uplink and you get a heavy rain, you'll lose your signal. And so that's another piece of it. Many of us use a little bit of both, but you're absolutely right that, I mean, mostly when going between networks. So large networks will have an MPLS setup or something similar. They have their own fiber network, their own dark fiber. It's all connected between their, there's like, for instance, for NBC, I think from DC to New York, there's 192 video pipes between MSNBC and the New York setup. And so that they have lots of it back and forth within the networks. But getting between networks is where the switch and LTN and everything else become more useful. And they're probably, at this point, I would guess 80% of the day-to-day stuff that you see online is on one of those. So, next question.
Next question comes to us from Marty Panetta Jr. in Los Angeles. He says, experimenting with Prompter, finding the 17-inch Glide Gear 750 with an iPad Pro too small to see. Is 24-inch too large? And what do you guys like?
Go ahead, Jason.
There is no such thing as a teleprompter that is too large, unless you mean too large for an iPad Pro. The issue that you're going to run into is it bright enough, and can you see it, and will it be at the fidelity that you are expecting? But no, 24 is not too big.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I take the opposing opinion.
Unfortunately, Courtney doesn't have a lot of experience with teleprompters, so it's really hard.
I'm sorry, sir. I don't think you're qualified for that.
And Marty Panetta Jr. is a producer, so his father was a big time producer. Knew him. But it depends on your purpose. If you're looking to use it as a teleprompter for reading text, the purpose of the beam splitter teleprompter is to get your eye line directly into the lens. And of course, the bigger the monitor, the further away your eye gets from the lens. Yep. So, and also since you have a Glide Gear 17-inch glass, a bigger monitor is not going to help you very much because it won't be reflected in the glass because you're too close with the monitor to see the whole monitor reflected in the glass. I use a lot for teleprompters. I use these e-yo-yos. They're 4x3, so they're not, you don't run into the image running off the edges of the glass. And they're not high resolution. That's the other thing. With a lower resolution monitor, things will be bigger. So text will be bigger. If you're sending it to it from a computer with a higher res output, it will scale it up somewhat. So that may be a solution for these e-yo-yo monitors that I just showed. Also have most of them have reverse image on it. So that's the other thing to look for in a monitor. And I do believe your prompter can be too big.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Now, that's a tough act to follow because that's about as good an answer as you're going to get. But I think the easy way to remember is if you're reading a script 4:3 with the monitor that Courtney was just recommending, and if you're using it as a Teratron, I think is the word that they used to use, a lot of real estate is good, as Jason was saying, because you can drag that box anywhere you want, and if it's a person at the other end, you can drag that box right in line with the lens, and you can get that eye contact, which is what you're going for. For me, I've been going crazy trying to figure out what prompter I want. I've been all over the place, so I understand what you're going through. I'm kind of leaning towards the Prompter People 24 Pro Flex with a sliding arm on it, so I can mount it to my desk, move it to where I need it, and boom, there it is. And then I can use all that screen real estate to move boxes where I need them to be, where my eyesight should be.
Go ahead, Tony.
I just wanted to say that I'm using the ICANN PT 1200. I am extremely happy with it. I am, Conversation with Tony Mobley has become head and shoulders in terms of Tony Mobley making eye contact.
Go ahead, Rupert.
For the teleprompter screens, as Courtney, just to follow on from Courtney's suggestion of the e-yo-yo monitors, I actually have an older model which I was hoping would have the flip function, but it didn't, and I wanted to make sure which ones did if I was going to purchase a new one. I emailed them direct and found them very responsive, so just a thumbs up for e-yo-yo.
And you know, a lot of times what we end up doing is taking a decimator and we just put it into the line with what we're doing. You do get a little bit of latency that way, so you have to be kind of careful of that. But it's a good way to just kind of flip things. Whatever monitor you have, you can flip it. Of course, that's an expensive way to solve that if you're going to leave it in a permanent installation, but it's worth having if you're working through that. I do think that, yeah, for Interatron, I think 24 is more comfortable. You get to see a bigger version of someone's face. But I agree with Courtney that for text, I think that 15 inches fine, 17 inch even, at a pretty high distance from the camera. You know, we've used 12 inch from 10 feet, and I feel like, so I just a matter of making the text big enough that that the person can read it. Next question is from, next question, go ahead. Sorry.
Then the answer's up here. Okay, good. Next question comes from Alex 40 Goldner in London, and he says yesterday's 12.1 update has introduced max screen sharing to FaceTime. How could this be useful for streamed events?
Go ahead, Alex.
Yes, in FaceTime, if you and I guess your interlocutor both have Monterey 12.1, you can choose to share one of your windows or one of your screens via FaceTime. I was just wondering how that could be useful. And of course, it would be nice if that could be a source into FaceTime, and then you can use FaceTime as your animated video switcher.
Do you actually get a
keynote? I mean, sorry.
Oh yeah. Do you actually get a clean video from that screen capture, like no rounded edges, no overlays, no anything? It's just a pure video that can go full screen.
That I don't know.
I doubt it, because it's Apple.
Yeah.
Like, I love Apple, obviously. I'm a big Apple fan, but FaceTime is a disaster. Like, it is an embarrassment to the entire company. And every time they add something, I have to admit that I approach it by looking at it and just going, well, let's see how this works, because it's just every implementation that they make. What they're really good at is, if I want to talk to one person on my phone and pick it up and look at it and talk to them, it works great. It's the best in the world. I can just call someone and be on a FaceTime with them. That's what Apple has figured out how to do. Everything else around FaceTime has been, their record is it's the worst record that they have in the company, is that they should just, I personally think they should really consider. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead, Rupert.
The quickest advantage it might have is as a quick remote support tool. Hey, show me what you're seeing. Let me see your screen to help you through some kind of troubleshooting process, maybe.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's great for one-on-one conversations, calling family and things like that, sharing your screen that way. You could do that. That's great. But if it has a broadcast tool, gosh, there's so many people that'll want to get on their phones and their tablets and be a part of that, and I don't think that's a good idea.
We used it. I'm bitter because we tried to use. We were needed to use FaceTime a couple times for things, and it was after using all the other tools that we have. It was always so frustrating, and it was always something that just was limited in a way that we couldn't fix, and we just have become bitter about it. I think is the issue. Go ahead, Dave.
One unique thing that FaceTime does have is that technology where it creates it to look like your eyes are looking directly into the camera. So that might fix someone who is never looking at the camera when you're trying to shoot them in Zoom.
I think I saw the demo of that and it looked a little weird. Like it was, to me, it was like because there was something wrong with it. I feel like manipulating pixels in the video feed on the way to you is a bad idea. Like, it's just, like it seems like, a cheat, but we have to be very careful. Like when we think about the metaverse and we think about all the things that we're doing, is we have to be very careful of something that seems like it's nourishing that isn't. And it creates a hollowness in our feeling of things, like when we're in social media, we feel like we're building a community, but we're not. And so it's kind of like, the easiest way to kill ants is to put sugar down where they're going through, and they'll start eating the sugar, and then you start adding Splenda to it. The ants can't tell the difference between the Splenda and the sugar, and they'll eventually starve the entire group. It'll starve out the entire, it'll just kill them all. They'll just starve to death. And so the thing is that's what, when we start messing with our experience with that, and we're about to go into a really, fragile time with metaverse and all these other things, and all the things we can do with video, is when we change things just a little bit and they're just a little off, it creates this hollowness that we won't notice, but it's something that's off. and it causes, it makes it feel less than, and it makes it feel weird, and it's a lower brain problem, not an upper brain problem. No, next question.
Tommy Shantz in St. Paul, Minnesota is up next. He said, I finally took the plunge and got a Mac Mini. What software and hardware do I need to dress it up to make it Zoom-tastic?
I go, Jason.
I was just taking notes. Alex accidentally told me how to fix my ant problem. That's great. Let me think. First, congratulations. That is an excellent thing. And I'd say the only thing you need in addition to it would be a solid sound card and an A10 Mini.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, if you're using MixFX Pro, that would be a nice addition to it, particularly since you can control your ATEM completely, and a Stream Deck would be a bonus. So there's not a lot of other things to get a good Zoom call. You got pretty much all of it right there in one little box.
Go ahead, Sky.
Yes, specifically for the ATEM, downloading the software to help drive that from Blackmagic. And then, of course, I did go ahead and install the Adobe Suite into mine because I never know when I'm going to need that Photoshop tool or something like that.
Go, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I just got a Mac Mini myself. So, and of course, I'm doing the Zoom ISO thing right now. But the one program that's been on Mac for many, many years, it's a great program, and it's called CamTwist. And it's a great way for you to do multiple scenes. And it's, like I said, it's been around forever. I think the last update, though, was a couple of years ago. So I'm going to double check make sure that's working.
Eventually, you're going to want Loopback and Audio Hijack. Just buy them together. It'll save you time, save you money to just get them both together. Next question.
Next question comes from Libby Wyatt in Atlanta, Georgia. Our friend says, has anyone received an Emmy from their local chapter? And if so, what did you submit and what tips can you share when applying?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I haven't received a regional Emmy, which is probably what you're talking about. There is a website called theemmy.tv where you'll find all kinds of information about Emmys and regional chapters. And if you enter your zip code down here, it will tell you about the application process to nominate someone. So that would be the place to go to if you're looking to nominate someone for a regional Emmy. Scientific and technical Emmys are different, which is what that one is over there. That's by the National Academy of Scientific and Technical Television Arts and Sciences, and they're out of New York, actually. So different arms of the organization.
Go ahead, Bill.
So I had some experience a couple of years ago. I was asked by the San Diego region down here to join with the producer of the local Emmy Awards. This is for the regionals, and they had people who were in the organization that were up for Emmy, so they couldn't do it. So I ended up building the video for the winners. And I had a lot of respect, and I still do have a lot of respect for the organization. They took the voting and all the rest of that process very seriously. I would say that if you want to get an inside track on how the actual process works, do some volunteer for the local Emmy organization in your thing, and you will learn a lot of kind of the back end working. There is nothing phony about anything that I saw. They did it scrupulously, the correct nominations and everything. And as I said, I came away with a lot of respect for them. But there are a lot of technicalities about what kinds of things they're looking for and what elevates you above the norm. They gave out hundreds of Emmys, and I think in all the things that I saw in putting together the video for the winners, the actual best work did end up taking home those regional Emmys. So I thought it was a good system.
Go ahead, Sky.
And the categories often will be a real gift as far as how much competition do you have? Because there's certain categories that you may be the only one in that category. So that might be a tip as well.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Scott Mueller in Germantown, New York, and he says, do you like the idea of keeping a lobby breakout room always open during a conference or event? It may irk some of the presenters or host, but if it's being recorded, why not let people walk into the lobby and chat?
Go ahead, Rupert.
It depends a little bit. I mean, Zoom Events, the new Zoom Events platform, has a feature called Lobby. That allows people to get logged in and at least see some pre-show information and have textual chat. And then in webinar, we've got this new feature coming soon called Backstage, which will allow your your panelists to gather separately and allow your attendees or the audience to accumulate before you start the show, and then you can have a chat there. But if you're going to have any kind of interaction, whether it's chat at a simple level or even more more interactive with video and audio, then ideally that needs to be moderated and then provide some value. I've certainly been to some events where you wander either into the lobby or these different breakout rooms and there's just either nobody there or nothing of any value going on. So I think it really all depends on what you actually want to provide in that space.
Go, John.
For over a year now, we have multiple rooms set up. So the lobby is the room that people come into, they log in, and often we have Sky there as their greeter. And then he gets them set up. Then he sends them into a green room. And then we have director's room where the director does the show calling. And then we have usually 2 stages. So we usually have 6 to 8 rooms set up inside of Zoom. And then Sky is the one moving people from room to room. It's super effective.
I think typically you want to get them out of the main room pretty quickly because you have to ask for permission all the time. So having them in that main lobby, you want to get them to a lobby that they're never going to come back to the main room if you can avoid it, because it's structurally difficult to deal with. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas is up next, and he says an upcoming update to Zoom will allow breakout rooms to be renamed, removed, or added after initial creation, even when the rooms are in use. How might this change your workflows?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I like this a lot because then you can keep other rooms active while you close out rooms, and instead of having to close out the whole thing and restart. And I think that was also the case if you did not check the box to say add people to specific rooms and let people go across different rooms. You could actually check that and uncheck that as you go.
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, to John's point, the sending people to a space, they don't want to understand where they're supposed to go. They just want to be sent. And we tried this in the Hour of Happy experience. We tried renaming the breakout rooms, and it was actually kind of a disaster because people were just getting used to the concept of a breakout room. And then, so to try to use the existing metaphors of backstage and on stage and main stage, we exercised that. We tried that. So there might be an opportunity there, but again, you're training your audience to do a thing, and sometimes it's just easier to put somebody there to go, you go there, you go there.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Stefan Fisher, and he says, is there a glossary in the web of all the special terms and acronyms the panel uses so often? And Stefan's in Würzburg, Germany.
I don't know if it's probably not. We should put a glossary. It'd be good to put the glossary in the Office Hours Global of the Office Hours Global glossary. And then what we ought to do is have it be, there's a list of things that are there. And Bill, if you can turn you turn on original audio? It's, you just keep pushing noise into the system. So what we ought to do is have something that,
sound was off, just to let you know.
Well, something you should, I know we're going to talk about a little inside baseball here, but you got to figure out you're pushing massive amounts of noise into the system. So that's why I keep on getting distracted, is because something in your system is like pushing just hiss into the system.
Wow,
it's
that's weird.
super distracting. Yeah. So anyway, so so I think that we ought to have something where people can request the terms be filled out. We can, rather than trying to think of all the terms people would do, what we ought to do is build something where people could request it, and then someone fills out that glossary. So as we just organically fill in the terms. So there might not be anything in B or C until someone asks for something. But people can request things, and then we fill out and build a nice little thing with some links and everything else. And so let's think about how we can do that next year. It's a good idea. Next question.
I'm going to try going back to the Zoom mute and see if that helps. So that means I have to go over here to answer. And Marty Pissetta Jr. in Los Angeles says, been playing with the teleprompter and find that using an iPad Pro with a glider 17-inch.
We saw this one before. I think it might have been put in again. Yeah, I think this one was already here before. Let's go to the next one.
Done. We're going to answer the next one. And this is from Nahul Goller in Argentina again. He says, something weird happens in my last live event. Every time I move a specific pan tilt zoom camera connected via HD Bassett.
HD base T.
HDBHT, thank you, to an HS1600T, the HDMI output that I enter in a DAC70 converter to SDI stops working. Only happens in specific positions. Very odd.
That is very odd. I'm wondering I wonder if those positions are more complicated than the positions you had before. So more moving, more something where somehow what it's doing is it's changing the frame rate, by a frame or two. Like it's overloading the compression that's going out. It shouldn't do that, by the way. Like that shouldn't happen. But I'm saying that the only thing I can think of is what typically will break an SDI converter is for the frame rate to change. Like if it shifts to a different frame rate that's outside of its system, it could theoretically stop working. So that might be the case. Next question.
Sorry, I got to get used to this. Claudio in Rome says, I'd like to know from the panelists if a similar service like YouTube's 360 live streaming is available.
Yeah, there's Facebook 360. There's not a lot of 360 has been one of those things that probably still coming, but when it comes to streaming it, everything after you get past Facebook and YouTube for streaming 360, things get really hard to find viewers, just for them to be able to see it. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I think that Insta360 also has a live 360, but I haven't looked in a while.
Yeah, the problem is nobody can see it. Like if you do it that way, you're going into the wild yonder. The only ones that really are something that you can stream where you can expect people to actually be able to view it, in our experience, and I've done a lot of 360, is those two platforms right now. And so you have to really deal with all the installs and everything else. So there's other players. It's just that no one's using them. No users are using them. Next question.
Let's see if there we go. That mute works. Answer Douglas Carmichael says, I saw a video of a Rwandan artist where the DJ had a MacBook Pro on stage. Wouldn't it be harder to get one and get it serviced in a country where Apple has no retail presence or service network?
Yeah, so it is harder in Rwanda, but it's a short flight to Nairobi and then also to Dubai. So there's a direct flight from there. And so when people need to get things fixed, they go somewhere else to do it. But Nairobi, I think, is where the nearest repair shop is to Rwanda. If I remember correctly, there might be one in Dar es Salaam as well. And so those are places that you can take them to get them fixed. The other side of that, though, is that I will say that Apple, as someone who's worked in Africa a lot, that the artist may just like to use those things because they're better. The software is something that they want to use and they can figure it out. And B, Apple is a bit of a status symbol. And so having Apple products in Africa tends to, like, you can buy an iPhone and sell it in Africa for 50 to 100% more than you paid for it in the United States, relatively, right when it comes out, because there's a group of people that can afford it and they want to stand out with their friends. Go ahead, Jason.
Having shot at least 1,100 DJs over the course of the last maybe decade, only a handful of them have been African. But in general, if they have one MacBook, they will have 5 MacBooks, especially if it's on a world tour.
Yeah. Next question. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, sorry about that. Next one comes from Paolo S.A. in New York, I guess. And he says, just starting to build a HomeKit. Can you recommend audio interface device that works for Office Hours 2.0, as well as a low or zero latency system for podcasting?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Well, the last thing you just said, low or zero latency, kind of bumps it into a semi-pro area or professional. Most of the people on here, I think, are a lot of people are using the sound devices MixPre 3 or 6 as a device. I use an RME device, which is about $2,000. It's not cheap. There's a lot of good USB, but just because the device you're buying is USB does not mean it's going to be low latency or good sounding. It all depends on the DACs that are inside.
Go, Jeffrey.
If you want a low profile type thing, Behringer has the Euphoria UMC 202 HD, which is a 2-channel that plugs in the USB and works really well. It's got the Midas preamps in there. I had a podcaster, we were talking about it the other day, and he just loves it.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yes, well, I'm using, of course, the Samsung MixPad MX124FX, which is an analog mixer, so there's zero latency in that, and it gives you also a nice side tone in your ear through the monitoring, and you can directly control. You have a knob you can reach down and grab and easily turn the USB level coming back from the computer, so you can balance your headphone level and the USB return level and your microphone level separately, and just grab a knob for each one. You don't have to search through any menus. So I recommend an analog mixer such as that if you want low latency and a good USB interface. And it's cheap. It's like $179. The microphone preamps aren't, of course, they're as good as the sound devices, MixPre 3, but they're probably good enough for, Zoom.
Next question.
Sam Downey in Bristol, England is up next. And Sam says, there we go. Oh, that's interesting. Just starting to build. I'm sorry, Alex, I can't read that. Things have moved around and I can't see it.
Is anyone thinking about, Sam asks, is anyone thinking about making an in-person visit to the new Academy Museum of Motion Pictures in LA? I will be there in late 2022, Fab Music History Exhibits and Cinema 2. Let's do a meetup there. Go ahead, Courtney.
I've been thinking about it. They send me, invitations to join all the time, the museum itself. And it's very close by. It's only about, 10 blocks away from me. So I think I will go over there sooner than later.
Yeah, sounds like fun. Next question is from Douglas Carmichael. Final question for the first hour. He said, in the African market, I've noticed that local apps have taken the place of international names like Uber. What would that be because of greater trust in African brands or first mover advantage? I can tell you that usually it's because they customize to their market much more effectively than the larger brand. So there's custom needs that are required. A good example is that Uber tries to go into places like Rwanda, but they have this whole motorcycle system that is very, very successful. So it makes it very hard for Uber to move in. And they also have lots of driver systems. And so the problem is that they just can't customize to that. And we see that a lot. I mean, for instance, it's almost impossible to find a Starbucks in Melbourne, just in case you're wondering. And the reason is because all the coffee shops in Melbourne, or every coffee shop, even the donut shop, makes better coffee than Starbucks. like it is, it's kind of the most amazing thing I've ever seen. As someone who goes to Starbucks all over the world, because I just know that I'll get the coffee I expect, it was funny to go to somewhere, A, that didn't have any Starbucks, and B, you're like, oh, the coffee's way better here. So that's a good example of kind of a customization of that market, and how local providers can still succeed against a much larger competitor. Is really figuring out. I'm going to tell one really 1 minute story. I had a friend who had a coffee shop called the Beehive. It was in South Side of Pittsburgh. Starbucks opened cat-a-corner to him. And so I asked him how business was going about a year into the thing. And he goes, oh, it's never been better. He goes, people go to Starbucks, and they see our coffee shop, which is artsy and cool, and it's got all this stuff. And then they come over here and they never go back. And he goes, Starbucks has like tripled our business. He goes, because he goes, now he said, if I was just a run of the mill coffee shop, I'd probably be run underground. But because we have local artists and bands, and we look different when you walk in, he said the Starbucks has been this massive magnet. And when you walk into Starbucks, it's empty all the time because people just they get to it and then they literally walk over to the other one. So it's a good lesson, I think, for a lot of us. Okay, so we're now going to change subjects and talk about audio issues. I think that this is a relatively good one for a fair number of us. I just succeeded in squashing some issues last week, so it was very current in my thought process. But I felt like a lot of times it's hard for us to chase down. It was worth talking about, like, this is what you're hearing, and this is one of the ways that we chase it down. So there's in the first question there, if some of the panelists want to talk about it, there's discuss audio issues. Just raise your hand in that question if you want to have one specific. One of the ones that we deal with a fair bit, I'll just kick it off with one of the ones we were dealing with recently is clocking. So one of the issues that you get into is when you have multiple mixers talking to each other. So like, let's say an artist's mixer and the broadcast mixer, the temptation there is to connect them over MADI, which is or Dante. The problem you get into is that their clocks, that are working can often be different. And what that sounds like when it works, when it doesn't work, is that you just get dropouts. So like it's all working, and then suddenly all the audio drops out, and then it comes back in, then all the audio drops out. And this is something that, the reason that I thought it'd be interesting for us to talk about what you're hearing when something goes wrong, and then talking about the fix, is a little bit so that people can, like, you can save the time, because there were some of us in this case that were like, hey, I know that's a clocking issue. I know what that is. Now, so oftentimes it's one device that isn't being synced correctly, or it's a device that isn't working correctly, or it can be a bad cable in the case of MADI. So, MADI has a bad cable, or a bad connection. It'll pass the audio as digital, but every once in a while it'll just drop out. And so, anyway, those are things, and the other way to do that is to actually use analog out of the mixers. So one of the things that you can do is drop a box that belongs to the time system of your send out mixer. You drop some kind of stage box that's over Dante or MADI, but it's no longer part of that switcher. This is the easiest way to do it, in my opinion, is you have a big stage box that you sit next to the switcher that might be massive, or a couple of them, and you literally do analog all the way out of that and into this thing. And then it's because that gets it out of the clock. And now it's all on yours, but you still do the long transport over an Ethernet cable. It's just there's a whole bunch of XLRs in one place. That's oftentimes, in my opinion, the safest way to not deal with this, because the worst part of it is that if you don't handle it ahead of time and you start hearing that problem and you can't fix it, there is nothing to be done, and you're just in a deep, deep place. And it can be really, really painful. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the other ones. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I struggled with this too, and in connecting two X32s for a brief period of time, I figured out the magic in what's it called, AES 56? Those two little Ethernets that actually require the XLR connection, the Neutrik connection. Oh boy, is it cool!
I think it's 67.
It's just supremely cool.
Yes, ASC 67. Go ahead, Dennis.
I thought I'd just mention the issue that I was having with the ATEM audio a few days ago, and it turns out that the gain was just too high on the camera, and that was why you were hearing that crunchiness in my audio. Mm-hmm. Mickey helped me sort that out, and I think the reports I've had is that it now sounds really good.
And if you're listening to this, go ahead and throw up questions of like, these are some of the things that I that came up for me, and if we don't have many of those, this will be a real short conversation. So go ahead, Bill.
Well, I've just been chasing down some today, and it's really interesting because my system interior here in my office sounds really good. I've checked it in multiple points, but I've been getting constant notes from people today that things are not sounding good on the show end. So I'm wondering, at what point is what you're sending being intercepted or being processed by whether it's your ISP or Zoom or something else, and how you can figure out whether it's actually what you're sending or what's happening after that. Is there because I don't think it's Zoom with you. I think that you have too much processing on your mic. So like you have processing off.
It doesn't sound like it, or maybe you have so much. The other option is that you have so much noise around you that Zoom's attempt to get rid of it is creating some kind of tunnel effect. But yours specifically, since you moved, has been it has been problematic. So it is there's something going on with the change in your environment that has had it. At this point, I would try to bypass absolutely every piece of hardware that you have. Oftentimes one of the problems that we get into, to get back to audio issues, is having too many things in the pipeline. And so having things that process, I'm not processing myself except for my noise assist. I don't do any processing at all, to my system as it goes out. So I think that there's something going on. It definitely sounds like it's your audio is being pushed through a very small straw. Like it's getting cut off a lot. Like it seems like there's a very, very aggressive noise. And I think that what it sounds like is you might be going through some kind of auto gain or something, some kind of noise suppression. It may be Zoom doing the noise suppression, but it's getting such a signal that is so noisy. I just know that what's happening I didn't expect to have this happen during the show, but a show about audio issues. But for whatever reason, when you leave your mic open, we're getting every once in a while we're just injecting huge amounts of hiss into the system, which is why I kept on losing track of what I was thinking.
Yeah, but it
And
must
so,
not be the mic itself, because I am using the mute switch the same way I always do, which means I'm not sending a mic signal into the thing.
well, what are you going into? What's this? So we're going to talk about this. So the chain is your mic goes into what?
My mic goes into the Universal Audio Apollo Solo through
And
the
is that-
Rolls mic switch into the Apollo
Okay,
Solo.
does the Apollo Solo have any filtering on it at all, or is it just simply passing through?
Yeah, there's a Manley voice box plug-in in
So
there.
I would turn all that stuff off.
Yeah,
Like
so
like that's the first thing I would do, is just turn off all the things that the Solo is doing. I think it's something in there. So the mic, that tells us. So this tells us this is really useful for us, is that what we want to do when we think about audio problems is think about the pipeline and where we're putting those in. So what's happening is that when you're pushing the mute down, when you're pushing mute down, the noise is being inserted by the Apollo, because it means that your mic is off and it's going into an auto. There's some auto gain that lives inside of the Apollo. Somewhere in some filter somewhere is auto gain. And so when it gets no mic input, it's just going, I'm going to turn it all the way up. Like I'm just going to keep turning up. And that makes a lot of sense, which is why when you mute your mic, it's not working. It's pushing more noise into the system, is because you're muting your mic doesn't make any difference, because it's hearing silence and then trying to make silence be something. And
yeah,
that's,
it's interesting, because that Apollo Solo, can you hear me okay now?
oh, it's even worse now.
It's even worse now, because now there's nothing in the chain. I
Now
just
you-
moved
now
the
you-
Manley plug-in entirely.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got two signals out of phase added together.
Yeah, and that plugin is gone now entirely. So this is directly into that. So I'm suspecting maybe it's something about loopback that's set wrong for where I am now.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, the first step with all the audio is to try to remove every variable that you can, out of the system. Yeah, to Courtney's thing, you could be some kind of canceling yourself or whatever. I would try to get rid of loopback as well. Just try to take loopback out of the system. Keep on with any audio problem, for me anyway, or any problem. I just try to take out as many variables as I can, and then slowly. This is not a problem. This is not how I solve audio. This is how I solve everything in life. so is remove the variables, remove whatever variables I can remove, and then slowly add one at a time back in, by only adding one variable back in at a time to figure out where that problem is. Now that may be, for me, that may be like taking one of these, do I have one laying around here? A cue box. I thought I had one here. Anyway, taking something like a cue box and putting it at different parts of the chain. Like, I'm going to plug it in here. Does it sound okay? I'm going to plug it in here. Does it sound okay? So you start sampling the chain, your audio chain, of where am I hearing the thing get turned inside out. And so, and we do find that, especially with audio chains, the more complex we make the chain, the routing chain, the more problems people have. A lot of us that have almost no chain tend to have it just be the way it is. Whereas as we add more things to it, it tends to be more complicated. And we just have to know how to get back to something simple as best we can. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, what it sounds like to me, Bill, is if you're using loopback to give you side tone in your headphones, instead of just going into the headphone channel, it's going back into your mic input channel, and it's mixing out of phase, because it's phase delayed, with your primary channel. And so you're getting comb filtering or cancellation coming from loopback. That's what it sounds like to me. But I was going to comment on synchronization, the stuff that Alex brought up earlier. That is mainly an issue, of course, if you're working strictly in the digital world, where you're mixing digital signals from one source with another source. There's a thing called word clock, and you have to learn about word clock. Most professional audio equipment used to be required more and more of the things are auto syncing, but used to have a separate input on all digital audio processing equipment called word clock, and you'd feed them a house word clock that would lock all of the sample rates together to achieve perfect sync, so you could mix signals without it clicking or disagreeing on the sample rate, or the sample rate being out of phase or out of sync with one or the other. And when you don't have them in perfect synchronization, you'll hear clicks or pops, or you'll hear complete dropouts if it's trying to auto sync and it just can't catch up, and it just starts over, it resets and starts over again. So that's what causes that, and that's why I use only analog equipment to
Well,
work on.
it is. I will say that the word clock. I didn't want to dig too far into, it, but I'm glad you brought it up. That's the issue. And usually when you have the dropouts, it means some piece of hardware somewhere is not getting the word clock or is not listening to it. So it can be like a little bit that isn't flipped on some mixer, and it affects the entire pipeline, as it works. So it becomes a real problem. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, if you're building an audio chain that for this program and you're using a ATEM device, it's going to be a hybrid system no matter what you do. The microphone is by nature a hybrid device unless you get in that super expensive Neumann. It's all digital, but I won't even talk about that. I had some problems in the beginning because I was using the mic input on the ATEM, which is just found out is really noisy and not a great preamp. And then I found that I need an outboard box. So if you start building it one little thing at a time, and here's my lower Fenwick, I started with the microphone. Then I started with a processing device. In this case, it's an AFET channel, and it's just an EQ dynamics processor. And then the question was, where do I put the audio? And the best place to put it is into the camera, which is in turn plugged into the ATEM. But in my case, I was going into a Sony FX3, but I was using the Sony line inputs. Again, they were noisy. So if you use the add-on device, which I think it's a digitizer, essentially, you plug it into and you get into digital inside the camera. From that point forward, everything is copacetic. So it was just sort of a trial and error until I finally built it up to the point where it sounded right. But starting with the microphone, and a good microphone, got a relatively good one, an AKG 414, I found that ATEM, camera is probably your best bet to get your audio. I'm not pointing at Bill. I'm just simply saying if you're thinking of building an audio chain.
And I have to admit, for me with the ATEM, again, love Blackmagic, will not use the audio inputs. like I just don't use them at all because they're just, I find them to be problematically bad. Go ahead, Dave.
I heard Jeff, then Dave. So I'm assuming me.
Dave. Yep. Sorry.
Yeah, I just am jumping off on a different little topic. We did a graduation this week in Georgia, and got the audio feed from the house there in the arena. It was a nice arena, and they were feeding us from about 300 feet away. And every time they ran us a new mic cable, it just had this horrible riz because their house PA was on a totally different power transformer in the building than we were on with show power. So we ended up, the solution after running 3 or 4 cables was to locally power an audio embedder, a video audio embedder at their stage box, and then run fiber, convert it to fiber, and then come out so that we had no electrical connection between our system and theirs. It was only light passing, back and forth. So,
and I think that I feel like Dante would probably work over IP as well. I don't know if you would have. I've never seen an issue where we had grounding issues that were carried over from an Ethernet cable. So you could, fiber at 300 feet, we'd probably move to fiber anyway. We'd probably have an Ethernet to fiber and then back it again. We probably wouldn't try to run, you can, but we wouldn't try to run it at that distance, I don't think. But a lot of times when we have long runs, that's when we're bringing a Rio box, or the funny thing is the cheapest stage box that you can get is an X32. So you just have it, you take an X32 and you just set it down and you've got a bunch of inputs, and it's just inexpensive to have a whole bunch of inputs on the X32 to bring it back. So that's another way to kind of just to set one over there with a Dante card and have it just pass all the audio back to us. I won't run analog. I think I've said this before, very far. I know a lot of people do. I just find that DXing analog is mind-numbingly complicated. Like it's just there's 1,000 little things that can go wrong with it. And so same thing with digital. So a lot of times what we try to do is have an analog short run to something that's like Dante that's on our system that pulls us back. And that can be whatever it is, but it just belongs to us and it doesn't interact with anything else over there. But like, for instance, one of the things we fixed with stage boxes, not stage boxes, but what we call mult boxes. Mult boxes are for the press. You've got 24 outputs of the same audio from the mix. So this is let's say a candidate is talking and you have to supply audio to all the press. You'll have your video from your mixer, you'll send it out to a mult box, and that mult box is notorious for being just buzz everywhere and everything else. And we eliminated most of that just by making it a battery powered mult box with Dante. Like when you do that, suddenly a lot of things get fixed pretty quickly as far as how that all worked. It didn't fix everything, but it really knocked out a lot of it. So let's go in, Bill. Let's listen to your mic. Kind of as we fixed it, it got worse. So it is very ironic that we're talking about it on. I don't know if it's ironic or apropos, but it is. But that we're kind of working through an audio problem while we're talking about audio problems. So why don't you talk a little bit and see if we've gotten any better?
Sure. Let's see if this makes any sense. Mickey and I are offline.
Sounds like telephone. I mean, it sounds like it's a good effect. I mean, I would remember what you did.
About 80% cancellation.
Yeah, there's like it's a good effect. Like if you wanted to talk about like you're talking in space, light years apart, then that you're doing the best you can for the given technology in the 22nd century. I think that would probably work fine, but yeah, exactly. But it's not. You're not getting full gamut yet.
Okay, well, then I'm gonna be quiet for a while and let you guys do this.
Just let me know on the back end when you want to try again. This is a great thing for us, and then we'll have to talk about it. See, now we're getting all that noise that I talked about before. So right now, and did you mute your mic there?
Yeah, my mic is on now.
It seems like it waits for a minute.
On.
Hold on. Mute your mic again. And then so the mic is muted, and it seemed like at some point after you've muted your mic that it turns up. I'm waiting for it to happen. Of course, now it won't happen. But that's the problem that we've had. Go ahead and keep on working with Mickey, and we'll come back to it. I can't believe we haven't. Yeah, that's great. So next question is from Sam Downing, and he said, for those novices, musicians and sound designers, what free sound libraries can you suggest to help out Alex Lindsay with his keyboard question? I like Labs from Spitfire Audio and Piano Book, links both in Mukana. Go ahead, Michael. Did we lose Michael? Oh, we lost him. Sorry about that. He probably signed up for that a while ago. Rupert McCrae asks, office hours audio experts have continuously shown excellent skills in troubleshooting audio problems remotely. Is audio engineering an ideal candidate for remote work? I don't know if it's ideal. The hard part is it's hard to see what's connected to it, what's connected to what when you're remote. But I do think that more and more, like the show that I worked on last week, I was remote. So I was watching the video and listening to the audio actually in a theater, but not on site. And I have a small preview room that I was able to look at what I was doing. The interesting thing there was when I will say that for QCing to manage quality control, it is really good not to be on site. On site is a huge distraction. You are caught up in the weather and the timing and where you can sit and the air conditioning and the food and everything else. When you're sitting somewhere remotely in a quiet space, looking at it, not concerned about what it'll take to fix it, it's really easy to talk about what's not working. so like this little piece of the audio isn't working, and there's a little glitch in the video, and there's a little, and I think that the more I do it, the more I think that it's really important to have someone off site that is, not connected to the constraints of the location, but just connected to the absolute what is ending up on the screen. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I take a bit of an opposing view. I think that the problem is to troubleshoot. If you run into a problem and the audio engine where everything is all the signals are being collected and mixed and set out is not with you, the audio mixer, in the same city, the same location, it makes it very tough to troubleshoot sources of problems and so on from a remote situation. I like to be able to be on the set, listening to what's, mixing everything locally, And that way I know, I can unplug a cable and plug another cable in to know if it's a cable, a microphone, a preamp channel, processing going out, and to localize a problem. And it's very difficult to localize a problem from a remote location unless all of the processing and mixing is done at the remote location.
Well, and again, I think that you also have to have someone skilled that's there, so you can ask them to look
Right.
at this and look at this, and we're hearing this problem and everything else. And I think for a lot of our kits, we're seeing most of the data, and we can solo things that we want to send back to us remotely. So we don't have to, what we're listening to is exactly what's coming out of the mixer, what you get from the headphones, while you were sitting at the mixer. So we can, do a lot of the mixers we use are something that we can remotely see everything about the mixer that's there. So we're not really dependent on that. Now, some of the mixers don't allow for that, and that's
as long as you can enable pre-fade listen from the remote location. Yeah,
pre-fade. We can listen to any given bus, all the we have total control. It's just because we have access to the mixer and the output. Next question is from Nathan GS in Singapore, and he says, "What are the common items that causes noise onto audio inputs that we can try to avoid?" Go ahead, Mitchell.
Well, if this was video, I'd say virtual backgrounds, but we're talking about audio here. The biggest problem I find is unbalanced audio or consumer levels into professional balanced lines. And on the ATEM, for example, if you're using a line in, there's an unbalanced input, and you must balance that if you're using a professional balanced console. And the best way to avoid that is first, very, very small unbalanced cable. I mean, the smaller the better. If you could just have it that big, that would be great, but realistically, it's probably this size. And maybe a Henry matchbox or something ahead of it in order to balance that audio going into the unbalance it properly electronically, so that you don't have buzz and hum and other things. But that's 99% of the problem when you got noise on your audio. It's an unbalanced issue.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, I agree with Mitch. Noise, hum, and noise coming in over microphone level signals. And the trick is to get the level up to line level as soon as you can through a quality preamp. And then once you're in line level, the exterior noises that are electromagnetic noises make less of a difference in your audio signal level. Use Canary star quad cable, which has a special cable that is twisted a certain way to cancel out any inductive noise that comes in along a long analog cable. Well, that's a tongue twister. Eliminate, get the signal up. Gain staging is important too. If you have an impedance mismatch, as Mitch was talking about, it can shift your frequency response totally, and you may not notice it. It'll attenuate a lot of the low frequencies and shift to high frequencies depending on which way the mismatch goes. So make sure you use a transformer to go between balanced and unbalanced, and the impedance of the microphone versus the impedance that input is looking for. These days with op amps, it's not as radical as it used to be with transformers, but so impedance can work its way out with today's modern electronic preamp inputs. If you're using something that's older that has transformer inputs, then matching impedance is fairly important, and balanced and unbalanced is fairly important. I think that's all. Yeah.
Yeah, we try to, on most of our professional events, we try to avoid unbalanced connections in any place at any time. Like, we will do almost anything to not handle an unbalanced connection. At home, potentially we might use something for that, but not in a professional environment. The first thing I do if I'm in an event where I hear hiss, I go down and find the playback operator. They will almost always have a pod DI with a little headphone jack coming out of and I take it out and I hand them a USB pre, and I go, this is what you need. And then it all goes away. So, getting away from unbalanced, keeping your audio as best you can away from power sources. The Star Quad will work great unless you run it parallel to, 100 amps. Which we've seen. Like, I was like, there was a loud buzz and they kept on saying it was fine. We walked in and there was this coil of 100 amp power and coils of audio going through it, and we were just like, this is not going to work. But this kind of stuff happens as people build up that don't know. So the people doing the power don't know anything about audio, and sometimes, unfortunately, in this case, the people doing the audio didn't know about power. So these are things, trying to keep those apart, trying to pay attention to where those are going to go, converting out of analog altogether as fast as possible, using it to fix your clocks and do other things. And Bill, we're getting that noise again. So now,
really, it's
then it just went away. Yeah, it just went away right when you started talking. As soon as you hit.
I followed Mickey's instructions, took anything out of channel 2 entirely.
Do you still have loop? This is a good thing for our conversation. Do you still have loopback in line?
Yeah, he told me to
get that out.
Okay, let's try
that out. Get that out. Like, what we need to do is, for me, it's like remove all things that could possibly, like what we want to do is get as close to your mic going to Zoom without any processing. So no processing in the Apollo. Every switch that can be turned off is turned off. No software, no anything. Just the Apollo should be the input. And you may not be able to hear yourself. You may not have side tone. You may not have a bunch of other things, but let's just see if that changes the way the mic sounds.
Yeah, I've turned off everything in loopback. There should be nothing.
No, don't turn it off. Quit it. Like, turn off loopback. Like, turn off the input in loopback. Don't turn off everything in loopback, but turn it off itself.
Yeah, I literally just turned everything to red, no operating switches at all, and then I shut down the app.
No, well, so you turned off all those processing on the left. Every one of those has been turned off. Like, not
looking at force quit applications, and loopback is not in the.
No, I'm saying when you open loopback though, because it stays in the operating system, you have to go down that left thing and make sure all of them have been clicked to off. Like, not the nodes inside the loopback, but everything has been clicked to off.
Far left side, everything was on red off.
Okay, and then what are you in Zoom? What are you setting as your input? Is it directly your Apollo?
But let me go to the Zoom preferences and see what it is asking for. Zoom preferences, audio. Universal Audio Thunderbolt is the microphone setting, so it's coming directly from the Thunderbolt interface.
What's your echo cancellation set to in Zoom?
Which tab is that on? Audio?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's under audio settings, down under music and professional audio if you have that turned
on. Echo cancellation is on.
And is it set to auto?
Yeah, I believe so. Ringtone. Yeah, I'm looking for auto, but yeah.
Try turning it off. Let's see if it affects it.
You want me to turn off echo cancellation?
Just for a second.
Cancellation is now off.
No, I mean, no change.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
In your suppress background, do you have your do you have original audio on or off?
Off.
And then do you have suppress noise background noise? What is it set to?
Set to low.
Okay. And are you in music and professional audio? Do you have high fidelity on?
Is that under advanced settings? Yeah, it's probably down here in advanced, right?
Well, it should be in the main setting now, unless you have a really old version of Zoom. It should just be in audio settings. It's just scroll down. It should be right under what suppress background noise, and the next one down is music and professional audio.
I'm not seeing that. A high fidelity mode, that's music mode.
Right, high fidelity music mode, and then below that is echo cancellation, right?
Right.
And below that is stereo?
Yes.
Is stereo on or off?
On.
Turn it off.
Okay, it's now turned off. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is with stereo audio's checked off.
And then, and you're using a 102, is that correct?
No, I'm using a Sennheiser MKH416.
Okay, and how close is it to your mouth?
2 inches.
Right. And then there's something processing it. Like there's something
going into.
Maybe I should pull the power on the Universal Audio box and just completely reset it. Maybe
try that.
Yeah, let's see. I'm not even sure how it's getting power.
Your USB. Remember when I had that issue?
Okay, so we'll come back. We'll come back to this. Okay. You're going to say something else, Courtney, about inputs?
I was just going to ask if it's a 416T or a 416 Phantom 48 volt.
Oh, he's not making any noise now.
Yeah. It's unplugged.
Yeah, but the hiss is gone. All right, so let's go to the next question here. Rupert McRae said, "How quickly do you call upon networking expertise when troubleshooting Dante?" Almost never, because if we bring Dante to a venue, we have somebody there that knows how to run our network, and our network will almost always be separate from. We don't run Dante over a network that we don't control, because it's too fraught with unhappiness. So it's all of our own stuff. Now we may have to run through somebody else's switches to get from one room to another. But usually we have someone who really, like in our case, Brian Maddox manages most of that. And, we've dealt with most of the issues that have come up. Go ahead, Jason.
The only thing I would add to that is if you have a switch that's running Dante, it is connected to nothing. And I mean nothing, primary or secondary. Maybe you open up a port for control, but for the most part, it's not part of a network. It just kind of looks like this Ethernet adjacent thing.
In an established network that we use every day, we absolutely set up VLANs.
Well, sure. Yeah, I mean on the show.
Right. But what I'm saying, that's what I was going to say, is that in an established network in a studio, we will set up VLANs that we run, and it's just fine, and everything works great, and it can all be part of the same network. And we've learned, we didn't do that at first, and then we slowly it was too expensive to keep doing what we were doing. In a show, we don't want to talk to anybody's IT about our Dante. It is a recipe for disaster. And so, by the way, when we're talking about troubleshooting, number one problem when networking is eco mode. So your switches show up, and they, for corporations, I guess they turn this thing on where they turn off all the time when they're not used, or they lower their power, or they do something. It is a disaster for Dante, and it'll turn into this thing that you have to dig through things and constantly figure stuff out. So the first thing you want to do with any switch that has any kind of control, that isn't like a dumb switch, if it's any kind of higher end switch, it's going to have an eco mode, and that eco mode is going to arrive to you on. Like the switch is always going to arrive with eco mode on it, and it is the devil. So, so you want to go in there and be as uneco as possible with your Dante switches. All the rest of them, you can do whatever you want to do, but we turn that off pretty quickly. Next question is from Roscoe Jones. He said, Mickey said he sold 3 copies of Audio Hijack Loopback yesterday, but we still had issues with open source OBS hiding a second audio path that many, other than Mickey, would not have found. Should open source software be avoided? Go ahead, John. Is John Preto still here? Did we lose him? John raised his hand. Oh, there you go. John? I can't hear you, John.
My wife broke her leg, so I'm having to run back and forth. Sorry.
Oof. Did she just do it right now, or did she do it a while ago?
No, it's for about a week.
Okay, I thought you broke it right now. I was like, why are you here? Why are you still here? Go solve that. Go solve that problem. My wife just broke my leg, but I told her I'm on office hours. We'll take you to the hospital.
I didn't tell her that.
Anyway, go ahead.
So I'm a huge proponent of OBS. Been using it for years. I don't use it in production because it's going to crash. As soon as you run it into production, it's going to crash. And I certainly don't use the audio channels in OBS because they're just goofy and they'll let you down.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think that for me the Log4j problem right now is a good example of, when no one's really managing it or no one's really accountable for it, it gets complicated. I try to avoid open source of almost everything if I can in my pipeline. I play with it, but I don't use it in production. Next question is from Tommy Chance in St. Paul, Minnesota. He said, what hum eliminators actually work for 60 hertz? And if they don't work, where do you look next? Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, the first hum eliminator I would reach for is a Sescom ISO block IL-19. That's what you want to search for if you're hitting Sweetwater. Rapco or Rapco Horizon makes a model called the ISO block with an X, BLOX, I think. And it's just a little inline XLR. And the old school method, I did have one of these sitting around. It is a little ground eliminator. Not the safest thing. You want to be very careful when you plug one specific piece that's bugging you. If it's not connected to a bunch of other stuff, sometimes you can pop one of these in on that one device at the end of a chain, and it might relieve the ground, and that one piece will take the hum out.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, you're talking about the analog world, and if you're in the analog world and you got hum problems, if you're on breakout box or a snake, you might just hit that hum lifter or ground lifter, which will accomplish the same thing except the electrical three-prong issue. We used to use humbuckers, transformers. In the old radio thing, we used a thing called the AT&T 111C. Transformers are magical for eliminating those problems. But in the digital world, a lot of it gets done in post.
Yeah, the main thing that we try to do is, number one, is design well for that and really have a communication of figuring out how you're going to manage that process. The second is to not have unbalanced stuff in your system. The third is to get it out of analog and into digital as fast as possible. Then you start trying to DX some of these things. We have one audio partner that I think I mentioned in the past uses all car batteries. They have this whole like system that they set up that can run for evidently a day, I'm told, or more on these car batteries. That, you know, audio components don't take up much power, and they do it specifically so that they don't have to ever deal with anybody else's. If it's hum, they know it's not coming from them because they're not connected to anything. Go ahead, Courtney.
Run everything off the same power. That's solution number one is, and when I'm on a set and
that gets to design when I talked about it before, but yeah, you're being more specific.
Right. So I send power out from me to all my peripheral devices off of my own common ground. So every ground is connected to exactly the same point and exactly the same source of energy. If you're not in a situation where you can do that, like you're getting a signal from another building or something where you can't share grounds across buildings, then you're going to have to lift the ground on one end if you run into ground loop noise. But I always distribute all the AC for all of my equipment from a common source, and that usually eliminates the problem.
Rupert McRae asks, so what's in your audio troubleshooting toolbox, either hardware or software? Go ahead, Mitchell.
RX-7, or excuse me, that's a car. RX-9, the ozone device.
For post.
For post.
Right.
For post, yeah.
Oh, for live and for me for post, to build off what Mitchell said, is Synaptics Unveil is a good piece of software that when whatever RX that I'm using doesn't work, then I go to Synaptic and fix it there. As far as on site scopes, I still use Spectre. I still can run it on a couple machines. It's still the best audio there, but there's Atomic.
Me too, I love it.
Yeah, I think there's a Atomic something or other that also is pretty good. But you want to see scopes because Spectro. So there's a couple things that you want. One is a leisure zoom meter. A leisure zoom meter, it's called a couple things in a different place, but it'll look spread out in stereo. When it's going straight up, it means that you're in mono, but everything's in phase. When it turns sideways, you have a polarity problem. So that means that, you know, and you have to have that on live. On a live show, do not show up without a leisure zoom meter. Like, you have to have it there because you have to be able to show someone a picture that says, look, it's not what I hear, it's not what I think, it's what I see. And that's why scopes are really important. Spectrograms and spectrographs are really, really useful for me because I can see a buzz. So like a lot of times we're managing audio for 20 rooms and I just have scopes for all the rooms up. And what I can see in those scopes is I can see level history. So I have level history, and what I do is I change the colors based on where their levels are. So it turns green when it's at the right level. It turns purple when it's too low. It turns yellow when it's getting to be too high. It turns red and so I see all these strikes of different colors across that level history. So I can see all 20 rooms, and all I have to do is look for purples, and I go, okay, I got to have them bring it up. And if I see reds, I have them bring it down. And Bill, you're pushing that audio back in again. And then the hiss. So if you're testing it, it's still happening.
Thank you.
This hiss, though, for instance, would show up as a line. There'd be a line or there'd be static going across it. And so I can see those things in the signal without having to listen to it. And then I can go listen to it because I can see that there's a problem. So having those scopes are really important. Then we talked earlier about a cue box. So you need something that you can listen to and something that can generate audio. And there's little bits and pieces that you can do there to make that work. But those are some of the key things. Go ahead, Courtney.
One thing I like to have is a cable tester. Something like this, you can get a variety of them that will test audio and video cables for proper phase relationship, open wires, open shields, things like that, that will detect all of those things. And especially on multi-conductor cables, you can, if you can find something that's cross-connected incorrectly, and if you're going over Ethernet, a good Ethernet cable checker too.
Next question is from John Snyder. And he said, from Reno, Nevada, he says, what's the recommended audio setup for someone who is using an iPhone with Filmic Pro through an ATEM Mini, since there is no audio input into that camera? I'm trying to think of what the recommended audio setup. So the tricky part is trying to get a signal out of the iPhone as well as a signal into, like, so you're trying to get the HDMI out of the iPhone, but you might want to try to get audio in. And I think you're going to have to push the audio into the ATEM at that point. Go ahead, Tony.
So what I'm doing is I'm using the audio from the How mic into the H6, and that way I'm using audio hijack to delay the Filmic Pro iPhone image, and that's the way it's working for me.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
Rode makes a app that'll work with some of their wireless microphones. You can get it right into your iPhone, and then there it's going to go into the system.
And I just don't know whether that Rode will work at the same time that Filmic Pro is working. I think that's the challenge there. Next question is from Christian Turry in London, UK. And he said, audio troubleshooting. Jeffrey, Rupert, John helped me create an ad hoc Christmas karaoke setup. A MacBook Pro headphone jack goes into a Behringer 802 mixer, times 2 of the Behringer XM8500 mics to a Denon AVR. Rookie audio questions. Which volume levels should I use? The MacBook Pro, the mixer, or the AVR? Go ahead, David.
You should definitely use the mixer. You should establish a proper level between your AVR receiver and the mixer. And once that's set, then use the knobs on the mixer to balance out your levels and turn up and down your music.
Yep, absolutely. Next question is from Liberty White. So, John, how do you use OBS if you don't use it for production?
I use it on office hours. I use it on office hours, and I use it on after hours for creating cool scenes that you can do really quick in OBS. If you've got a powerful enough machine, and it runs better on PC than it runs on Mac. But I've been running it for years and years and years. I just don't use it in production. Use it on office hours and after hours.
Roscoe Jones asks, when is orange power necessary, and what are its benefits? Go ahead, Courtney.
You will find these orange outlets in hospitals, and they're usually on a separate electrical source that is either battery backed up or generator backed up, and it has its own grounding system so that you don't run into ground loop problems. You don't have to use it, but be careful what you plug in. If you short out an orange socket, somebody's heart-lung machine next door could go out. So be very careful if you're in a hospital or a healthcare situation and there's orange power available.
Next question is from Dave Node in Charlotte, North Carolina. He says, for remote mixing, what is your system service of choice for monitoring the audio remotely? I know a lot of us use Unity Connect as a return. There is also, now my brain is going to turn off. There's these little boxes that we've gotten in the past that for some reason I can't think of at the moment. They're very, very low latency, like 10 to 15 milliseconds of low latency, and it's going to come to me in in the next 2 questions down that are low latency that we've used in the past. I know a lot of what we've used recently has been also remotely possible. So because we're using Yamaha, QLs and CLs, remotely possible sends that return back, to the person who's using it. So I know that Brian uses that a fair bit. So I can't think of the name of it, but there's some low latency hardware return systems that will work, and I just can't think of the name of it off the top of my head.
Would it be barracks?
Barracks. Yep, that's it. That's where the barracks are the returns. So you can get these little barracks audio returns. They're super low latency. You can set them up point to point, so that you can hear them. And then we've also even sent them over like ClearComm returns as one of the inputs into a ClearComm system. It's just a matter of keeping it as low latency as possible, so that you can hear what you're hearing. The latency isn't as important as it sounds, but obviously you want it to be within a couple tens of milliseconds, to make sure that you can hear it. But yeah, the barracks is what we used. I know years ago that was the big connection for us, and we've put them into place in the past. Is that a barracks right now? That's Mitchell. You're showing a barracks. Yeah, that's a little box there, and they have worked exceptionally well for us in the past. Do you use those, Dave, or have you used those?
No, I've just read about them, and I didn't know. It wouldn't actually have occurred to me to use it for that purpose. That's great.
Yeah. You can take the audio out of whatever you want to monitor out of the mixer, put it into that, and have yours on the other side. And you'll get this really low latency, high quality audio between the two. It's like 8-channel. I mean, you can get bigger barracks that'll do more than that. And then you have some controls on the back end. Be hard to know because their booth at NAB is anemic. Like and they're the kind of people you walk by and they don't really talk to you. Like you're like, I don't know why they're here. Like you start asking questions and everything's answered in mono, like in like one word, yes, no, and they're not like there's no. I'm usually annoyed by people walking up to me and talking to me while I'm, while I go to the booth and I'm just looking. They're the opposite, where I can't get anything out of them if I'm trying to talk to them. I feel like they're waiting for somebody other than me to come to the booth, and maybe that's the case, Mitchell.
Their gear seems like it belongs in hospitals or something. I'm not sure what. Yeah,
it does. I don't know what it's for, what it is mostly used for. I just know what we've used it for in the past. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Johan Reichel from Barracks, the CEO, would shoot me if I didn't say this, but I've been using them for 8 years to distribute an audio network to New Balance stores around the country, and they're rock solid, absolutely rock solid.
Yeah, they work all the time. Like that's why we've used them. Is you just once they're up, they take a little bit of tweaking to get them set up. Once they're set up, they just do the thing. It's a really, really powerful set of hardware. The next question is from Douglas Carmichael. He said, on a recent 3 Doors Down tour, a MADI link was the primary stage to console link with the AES3 and the analog as backups along the Dante network. Would you get the same resiliency in primary secondary Dante networks as opposed with primary secondary Dante networks as opposed to MADI? All I'll say is that MADI, I keep on being told that MADI is easier than Dante, like it just works and everything else. And
no, it doesn't.
It's the farthest from the truth. Like I find MADI to be way quirkier than Dante. And I don't know whether it's just because I use Dante a lot more, but every show I get with MADI, I just know there's going to be something messed up. like something's not going to work, like, and I just enter the show like this is going to be there's something going to be wrong, and so I every time I use MADI, I become less, because I've even suggested it because I was like, oh, well, this will be easier. This is a complicated pipeline. We'll just use MADI so that we don't have to think about it, because Dante would be too hard to establish. At this point, I would never use MADI by choice. I think that it's a disastrous format for what we're doing. Partially because I think it's sold as like, oh, we can just plug it in and it'll work, and it's just the farthest from the case. Douglas Carmichael says, currently I own a small SoundGrid studio system, and I've built a relationship with Waves. If I'm building a home studio for remote production, would it be best to go all Dante? I've taken the courses, but I want to develop actual Dante experience. I don't know. I mean, I think that the Wave stuff actually would work. The SoundGrid, if you already have a SoundGrid set up, I think that the SoundGrid at home is going to pass it's going to do all the things you need to. Like, I don't think that there's anything that you would need to change. I actually think that Waves is a pretty cool setup. The SoundGrid system is pretty cool when it's done by someone who really knows what they're doing and it's their own system. Where we generally find Waves to be problematic is when it has to integrate, when we have a Waves operator that has to integrate with other people or has to do something that they haven't done before. So that's where every time we see a Waves operator in a system, we kind of know that, like on site, that we're going to be in trouble with audio. Like Waves just equals to us, this is going to hurt. and we just like go into it, but we always go, but we'll see how it goes. And there's always somewhere in the setup, there's always 2 hours of a Waves person trying to dig themselves out of something they got themselves into. We're just waiting for them to get it sorted. And we always think that it's going to be different, or we hope. I think it's more of a hope thing, that we just hope that this one will be different than the last one. And it just never is. It's just always got. Now, what I will say is that when someone comes, they've tested it ahead of time. They've got it all running. They've made everything work. They're not going to change anything. They're going to have it be the way it is. And they bring it in to run a podcast studio or to do a little thing on site. I always think this is the most amazing little piece of software I've ever seen. like this is a great little setup. The routing is really cool and everything's really easy and it's got a great interface and everything else. And so it's one of those things that you keep on thinking that it's like, I always think of Waves as kind of like Lucy in
I don't
Peanuts.
think I've ever seen Waves in a high-end show.
No, you don't see it in a high-end show. No, we don't see it in high-end shows. We just see it in high-end shows. You see Digicos and other things, and Calrecs and Yamahas and stuff like that. But in these little smaller shows, we see these Waves guys come up, and it's like Lucy. Like you just think, I'm going to be able to kick the ball this time. Like you just want to run up and as Charlie Brown, and you just want to run up and kick that ball, and every single time it's taken away. So anyway, that's all I'd say about Waves. But I would say at home with that process, I would totally just stick with what you got. I wouldn't try to add another network because I think that in a home environment, it totally works. Like I think you're totally in a place that in an established environment, I think Waves is super powerful. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think Gilad Karen would yell at me again if I didn't say something in behalf of Waves. If you're using their plugins, no problem.
Plugins are great.
A little more sophisticated.
The plugins are great, and the sound grid is great in an established setup that doesn't change. What we find is that when you take the Waves to a location with lots of new things, it hurts. You're just asking it to do something it's not good at. That's all. I mean, it's not where its strength is. But what I will say is that every time I touch it in an environment that is settled, that has been tested, that's been figured out and routed, and all the little things have been normalized out, it's amazing. It's super powerful. Yeah. Roscoe Jones in Brea, California says, Mickey and Bill are planning on troubleshooting in after hours. Should we get them started here? Well, I think we're out of time, so we may have to just go to after hours anyway. So they've Bill's already gone, so he's off. So anyway, so it was funny that we had an audio issue that was during the show. So that was an interesting problem, but that was good. So anyway, thank you so much to our producers for all the great. I was a little worried. We didn't get a lot. Usually, I don't get worried that we don't have a lot of questions at the very beginning. But if we get to 5 minutes after and there's not a lot of questions for the second hour, I go, oh, this could be short. But as always, producers brought up the system. They got it. They got us in a bunch of good, great questions. And thanks to the panelists for a lot of great questions as well. And thanks for all the input. It's good to see you, Dave. We haven't seen you for a little while, so welcome back.
Great to be here.
Yeah, hopefully you'll join us more often.
Yeah, I got 3 weeks off for the holidays.
Outstanding. So Dave will be around, and so anyway, so we'll but thanks to the panelists for all your great knowledge that you're handing out to everybody. Things could get a little hectic next week, so I just we're going to keep tightening the bolts this week. I'm a little nervous. All right, see you now.